Hello, welcome to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mail. We got Sports 25 to life. We're talking about tonight's slate of action. Of course, FanDuel, DraftKings, doesn't really matter. Talking about site pricing, availability, all those things. It's going to be an interesting night for pitching. Chris Sale, obviously your top option, 12,700 on DraftKings, 11.5 on FanDuel. I mean, he's just been an absolute machine. Up to 34.6% strikeout rate on the season. Only walking 5.4% of guys. He's on a historic run, and I mean that literally. 9 of his last 10 games with 10-plus strikeouts. He's expensive, and the matchup's tough, but that's going to drive his ownership level down. And, I mean, he's certainly still your top option. It's up to you to decide whether you're going to pay for him in your cash games because there aren't a lot of high totals. It's not like you need to get a bunch of Coors bats. You can certainly still make a solid lineup with Chris Sale if you feel good about him in your cash games. But, I mean, he's easily the top GPP play.
Yeah, I think he's the top play overall. We mentioned it on one of the other pods today. I think even though Toronto has a really potent offense, I mean, they're facing who looks like the best pitcher in the major leagues right now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's striking out 10-plus batters a game basically every time. I have him projected for 9.9 today. I think he'll be right around there again. Obviously, the White Sox are playing in this game, so it's going to keep the over-under down in general, but it's at -7 or at 7.5 and -126. The Vegas odds aren't bad. I mean, that's a pretty solid win favorite for a guy pitching for a team that's not been hitting whatsoever. 7.5 over-under, even at worst, he's probably projected to give up 3 runs or so, 3.5 maybe. So I feel pretty strong about playing Chris Sale in basically any lineup you can fit him in for the most part. He's obviously ridiculously expensive, especially on DraftKings at 12.7. 11.5 is a little bit more palatable on FanDuel, but there's just no one else that really sticks out to me in terms of like cash game plays or GPP plays over him. My favorite cash game play is probably AJ Burnett if the weather works out there. He's a -142 favorite. Over-under of 7 against the San Diego team that's just been terrible against righties, and their whole lineup's stacked with righties. I mean, we talk about this basically every time a decent pitcher plays San Diego, that it's just an absolutely great spot to target. He's playing in PNC Park. That's been a pitcher's park, really strong one all season, actually. One of the lower scoring parks. I think they're in the bottom 3 right now in terms of scoring. So I like Burnett a ton if the weather works out there. If it doesn't, I'm going to be looking around quite a bit more because Shields is another nice option in that game in terms of cash game. Obviously not the win favorite that Burnett is, but Pittsburgh's been struggling a little bit against righties again. They keep getting really hot and cold, and if you can get them when they're on a cold streak, I mean, they've been really bad at times on cold streaks, so I'm going to be looking at that a decent amount. Outside of that, I mean, there's no one else that I really love in cash games. Who's the other guys that you're really liking in cash games today?
I'm looking at Carlos Carrasco still. We know Houston strikes out a ton. He doesn't have the concern that Danny Salazar does with the home runs, which is obviously where Houston gets all their upside. Obviously, the most home runs of anyone in the league. But fortunately, this game is in Cleveland. Carrasco, 27.9% strikeout rate, a solid 48% ground ball rate, only walking 5.3% of guys. So my thought is, maybe he does give up a few runs, but his strikeout floor is just so high that he's not likely to hurt you. And, I mean, he's very unlikely to implode. Obviously, confidence got to be riding high, coming within 1 pitch of the no-hitter last time out, 13 Ks. Game before that was great against Detroit, 8 innings, 7 Ks. So I'm a huge fan of Carlos Carrasco tonight. If you can't afford Chris Sale, I think he's my next favorite option after that. And then the opposite side of that one's pretty interesting, too, with Dallas Keuchel, who doesn't have a ton of strikeout upside. But he also, I mean, he's just incredible keeping the ball on the ground. And he's shown absolute dominance this time. 2 complete game shutouts in his last 7 games, too.
Yeah, both of those guys great at keeping the ball on the ground. I like both of those options for GPPs especially. I think Carrasco, like you said, his strikeout upside gives him a nice, working cash game floor, even if he gives up a few runs. So I don't mind that, especially with how much Houston strikes out. I think they're still up around 24% against righties. I mean, he's a really strong upside play that he has so much upside in basically every category right now. He's pitching deep into games, everything, that he gives him a really nice floor. You mentioned Keuchel and his ground ball rate has been solid. Probably my one cheap option that I really like today is Chris Heston, who is another guy that keeps the ball on the ground a ton, facing a Mets team that really hasn't been hitting very well at all. I mean, Lucas Duda is the one guy that you're a little bit worried about in that lineup, maybe Curtis Granderson from time to time, but I mean, neither one of those guys terrifies me, and we've seen Heston do a really good job against teams that haven't been scoring a lot of runs, really. I mean, he's been up and down all season. We saw that no-hitter where he went just absolutely crazy with 11 strikeouts, but he's been alternating between 6 and 1 strikeouts all the time lately. And I mean, you just don't really know what you're going to get for him, but at 6,300, that's really factored into his price. And he's got a great matchup. The Giants have a pretty nice matchup facing a pretty weak lefty in Nice today, so he should get some run support. I think he's a pretty interesting play, basically in any format, but he's just not a guy that is safe.
Yeah, completely agree. Like you said, really inconsistent with the strikeouts, and he does struggle with lefties, but once again, you pointed out only really Duda and Granderson that worry you in that lineup, and you mentioned keeping the ball on the ground. Actually, the 2 lowest home runs per 9 of anybody on the board tonight, Keuchel at .51 and Heston at .55.
Yeah.
So definitely some big-time upside with those guys, and like you mentioned on the earlier podcast on the DraftKings one, you need upside if you're going to win GPPs. You getting a guy that goes 6 innings, gives up 1 run, and gets 2 Ks isn't going to get it done for you. So you need these guys who can pitch deep, who can get you strikeouts, and both those guys fit that bill. Another guy that's interesting tonight, John Lester. He's facing off against the Cardinals, who, as we know, have been awful against lefties. Chris Sale dominated him. Quintana had a pretty good game against him as well not too long ago. Lester's been very inconsistent, which is why I'm certainly not considering him in cash games. But
yeah,
$8,700 on FanDuel, $9,000 on DraftKings. Almost in that range, right around A.J. Burnett and some other guys where he's probably going to go overlooked, especially because there's a misconception that the Cardinals are just a great offense against everyone. They're a very good team, but much, much better against righties. So I think that John Lester, although he hasn't been particularly good this year, still 22.7% strikeout rate. I mean, he's got a lot of things going for him tonight, and I think he's going to be a low-owned GPP guy that I'll be targeting as well.
Yeah, I like Lester quite a bit. I mean, St. Louis strikes out 23.7% of the time against lefties. Like you mentioned, they've been much better WOBA-wise against righties. So I think there's some nice upside here. I mean, we saw this last week when Chris Sale faced the Cardinals, and people were like kind of shying away from him. And he went out and he pitched a standard Chris Sale game because they do struggle against lefties quite a bit. And good pitchers are good pitchers, even when they're facing good hitting teams, because I mean they're going to go out there and do their job most of the time. Obviously, Lester hasn't looked like the ace that really the Cubs or anybody else expected him to be this year, but he's looked pretty good over the last few games, and he's going to come around at some point. He's too young of a guy to just be done. I mean, 2 out of the last 3 games, he's gone 6 1/3 plus with 1 or less earned run. Actually, 3 of the last 4. Now that I say that. He went 7 innings against Cincinnati with only 1 earned run, too. His strikeout totals have been a little low, but they haven't been terrible. I think he's a really strong GPP play today because, like you said, he's going to be under-owned because everybody just sees St. Louis and moves on to the next guy for the most part. And at only $9,000 on DraftKings, I think that's a great GPP play.
Yeah. Speaking of another great GPP play, we mentioned Brian Dozier, Trevor Plouffe, guys who are great against lefties, but you also mentioned that you're not stacking the Twins, and I tend to agree with that. And Wei-Yin Chen's a guy that you and I both talked about as a very consistently good pitcher. So considering a lot of people will be targeting Minnesota, he's going to have a really low ownership. And I mean, he's only allowed more than 300 runs once this season. He's got a fair price, $7,700 on DraftKings and $7,800 on FanDuel. If you look at his numbers, 20.4% strikeout rate. You don't like his home run per 9, 1.42. Pretty bad there. Only a 40% ground ball rate, but only walks 5.7% of guys. He's not the guy that's going to put up that gaudy stat line with 8 innings, 10 Ks, things like that. But he's got some upside, and I mean, low ownership in itself might be valuable enough to consider him tonight in some formats.
Yeah, I mean, he's been incredibly consistent too. Like, he hasn't been amazing, like you were saying, but he also, I mean, he's only given up more than 3 earned runs twice this season, and that was 4 earned runs in both of those games. Yep. So, I mean, there's a really nice floor with him here. I mean, he's a guy that gets hit around a little bit. He pitches the contact a lot. Like you said, he's not going to rack up strikeouts. But, I mean, he's gone, I believe, 4 straight starts now. 5 straight starts giving up 2 or less earned runs. I mean, you're not going to find that very often, especially at his price tag. So I feel pretty good about him both in cash games and GPPs, actually. There's a little bit of a limited upside there, like you mentioned, with the lack of strikeouts, and he's not a guy that pitches really deep into games a ton, but he did go 8 innings last time out. I think he's a strong play overall at this price.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then there's one more guy that I'm going to mention here, and this is DraftKings specific because he's $8,400 on FanDuel, but $6,700 Edison Volquez
Yeah.
for on DraftKings against Tampa Bay. We've seen what Tampa Bay has gotten, or not done, I should say, recently. And Volquez does have some upside, but he's also been wildly inconsistent. 8 strikeouts, then 3, then 0, then 2, then 6, 6, and 9. So, I mean, you never know what you're going to get from him, but at 6,700 tonight against a really struggling offense that, I mean, really the only guys, I mean, you got Evan Longoria, sometimes Kevin Kiermaier. No one else in that lineup really hits at all. So, I mean, $6,700, I think that there's certainly some risk, but he's got some upside, and he's a guy who's been really, really, really good against left-handed batters actually this season. I looked at his numbers, and I was kind of surprised to see him so good. 263 WOBA allowed to lefties. So, I mean, if he can mitigate those lefties, and that lefties in that lineup just aren't that good anyway. So,
Yeah.
I think he's a really interesting tournament option tonight as well.
Yeah, I mean, his big thing has just been he throws way too many pitches. He gets pulled in the 5th inning or 6th inning of a lot of games. Mostly the 6th, I guess. He's averaging about 5 2/3 on the season. He started off the season really hot. If you take out those games, I mean, he's been in the 5-6 inning range quite a bit. But he's also got a pretty solid Kansas City team behind him that had him rack up 4 wins in a row prior to that last game against Houston, where he racked up 8 strikeouts and got hit around a little bit. But I think at that price, he's a solid play. It's been the same story for him at that DraftKings price basically every time he pitches lately. He's always $2,000 more expensive on FanDuel when he's a DraftKings only play, but I think he's a pretty solid one at that price.
Yep. There is only one other pitcher I'm really considering, and that's basically because the team he's facing is the worst in the league against lefties, and it's not even close. Mark Burley, not a strikeout guy, not a guy that you feel good about playing.
Yep.
But if you're looking for a guy that no one's going to be on, he's opposing Chris Sale. This is a terrible White Sox lineup, especially against lefties, like I mentioned. So, I mean, you look at his numbers, a 13.1% strikeout rate is just terrible. 48% ground ball rate, 4.6% walk rate. So he's a guy who lets you put the ball in play, and this team's not doing any damage even when they do put the ball in play. So if he can get around Jose Abreu, you got lefty-lefty with LaRoche, lefty-lefty with Adam Eaton. Even the decent hitters there are going to be kind of mitigated by that lefty-lefty matchup. And I mean, Burley's been pretty consistent, 17 or more DraftKings points, it looks like, in 8 of his last 10 starts. So he's a guy who, I mean, he's pitched 7 straight innings, 7 innings or more in, 6 of his last 7 games, I believe. So not a guy you expect big things out of, but this is such a bad offense that you got to consider him tonight.
Yeah. I mean, he's just been doing the same thing Burley always does. His advanced stats never look amazing. Like, you're not going to go out there and watch him pitch and be like, wow, I wish I'd have played this guy. But, I mean, he gets the job done basically every time out. Every once in a while he gets blown up, but that's going to happen to any pitcher that doesn't have, like, outrageously, like, unhittable stuff. So, like you said, I think he's a fine play, especially at that DraftKings price of $6,800. I think the last guy I would mention is Phil Hughes. Baltimore has been super up and down lately. I mean, we've seen them go from scoring 8 runs to 0. Like, I'm not a huge Phil Hughes fan. He's usually a guy I like to play batters against. I'll definitely have some of the Baltimore offense today. But we mentioned on the DraftKings pod, I think at 8,000, he's going to be a super low on GPP play. And, I mean, Baltimore went off yesterday. They went off on, I think, Friday, and they were ice cold on Saturday, or maybe it was opposite of that. No, they went off yesterday, which was Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been just really up and down. I'm not going to try and figure out
they're
all their
beatable,
runs
is what
scored.
you're saying.
Yeah, what I'm saying is they're beatable at times. And it's not always the great pitchers that shut them down. So that's the one thing about the Baltimore offense is they're a great stack because when they do get hot, like they tend to get hot as a team and score a ton of runs. But when they're cold, they're really cold as a team too.
Yep.
And Hughes is a guy that's been around a long time. He has pretty good stuff, small strikeout upside in terms of like he can give you 7-8 in a game like this where he gets to face Chris Davis 3 or 4 times because that's always nice for anyone who's trying to strike batters out. But I think he's a fine play. He's a small favorite in this one. I don't absolutely love him by any means, but I think as a GPP play, I'll mix him in a little bit just because at that price, I think he's just over that 7,000 plateau where almost no one's going to play him.
Yep. And, I mean, he's one of the best ever, actually, at not walking batters, 2.3% so far in the season. So definitely consider him. And that's going to wrap it up. All these other guys are guys that you either don't want to play or you want to target. And find us on Twitter at DFCafe, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.